Uh, Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Rendina. I'm the Business Services Officer of the City of San Clemente. Welcome tonight to the public workshop for the cost of service study for the city's water rates. And we're going to begin with a Pledge of Allegiance. So if you all please stand and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for justice for all. All right, thank you. Joining me tonight is Dave Riebensdorf, is the Deputy Public Works Director. Immediately to his left is Robert Grantham from Corolla Engineers, and Pierce Rossum here next to me, also from Corolla Engineers. And Eric Sun is here to assist, Assistant City Manager, as is James Mashinoff, City Manager, and we'll call upon you if you would like to speak. Tonight's agenda, public workshop, is to provide information relating to the cost of service study for the city's water rate structure. The workshop provides an opportunity for the public to gain an understanding of the study process, the city's existing rate structure, and provide input that would help staff craft a fair and equitable rate structure to operate the city's water utility into the future. There will be a formal presentation by Pierce and Rob, followed by a question and answer period for the public. Like other public meetings, each speaker will be required to complete a blue card, and those cards are at the back of the chambers. Prior to speaking, if you'd be so kind as to bring that card up to me, and we'll go ahead and take them in the order that we get them. Each speaker provided 3 minutes to present, and in all likelihood, one of the panel members will provide some form of response to the speaker's comments. We obviously want to limit it to not a 20-question interchange, but we'll see if we can't address all questions asked. Otherwise, we're going to put my contact information up, and the public is encouraged to go ahead and send emails or mail to myself or direct it to the city clerk. And we will take your comments into account and as we proceed in the cost of service study. So with that, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Rob and Pierce.
Thank you and good afternoon. Just have a brief 20-minute presentation or so to go over a couple items here. As Tom mentioned, the workshop is to be both educational, quick introduction of what we're doing, and really to seek broad input from the community, what's working, what's not. So just for the agenda for the presentation, project overview, introduction to the cost of service, and then we'll end with the public comment and Q&A. The reason we're here is really trying to adjust to the new normal. The world changed for us about a year ago when the governor ordered a 25% conservation mandate. So trying to adjust to those changing demands and changing costs. Just identified some challenges. Really what we're looking here is water use is down. The expenditures currently exceed the revenues that are being collected through the water rates. One of the big purposes here is to define revenue resiliency, so making sure there's a stronger nexus between the costs being incurred and the revenues being collected, and then making sure that the rates that are developed here are understandable and generally accepted by the public. How is it remedied? Well, that's why we're here for the cost of service. The first piece is really to identify the revenue needs, analyze the customer data. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about what are you using, how that changes in terms of seasonal demands and different customer classes, and then how we can align those expenditures with revenues. Other considerations, really looking at the customer impacts, because at the end of the day, the water bill is what you care about, and then looking to implement any changes here starting January 1st of next year. Quick overview of the system. We've got over 17,000 accounts, and just looking at 210 miles of pipeline, 14 reservoirs, pump stations, pressure-reducing stations, groundwater wells, and 3 sources of supply, groundwater, imported water, and recycled. Reason we focus on this is because we're going to be designing the rates around your system, and we want to make sure, what do those reservoirs provide, how were they designed, how were they sized, and how do we feed that back into your rates. The existing rates will be reviewed for potential adjustments, what's working, what's not, so if you can provide some comments in terms of any personal experience with that. But right now we have a tiered rate structure for residential, a uniform rate for commercial, and then just asking some quick questions in terms of how have these assumptions changed since the last study, what should be updated or refined, the potential impacts, of course, and then the potential revenue or financial risk. With tiered rates, especially with conservation, there's a lot of revenue, there's a lot of cost associated with those higher tiers. So making sure as people do conserve that there's a nexus between the costs that are shaved and the revenues that are lost. Now moving to the introduction of the cost of service. I'm going to just focus on the step-by-step approach here, so I'll have a slide for each of these individual components. But starting with the policy and rate structure review, working through all the way to the public and messaging components. Starting with the policy and rate objectives, really looking for high-level directions based on specific city needs and community values. We, of course, have the study objectives that are clearly outlined in of the city's RFP: financial stability, legal compliance, cost of service pricing, and cost recovery. Those are really clear objectives, but then we also have some policy considerations that we're going to look for from the community, from staff, and from the council. Financial resilience, administrative ease, making sure that any rate structure we implement or propose can be easily administered. It doesn't cost a lot of technical reworking, customer impacts, and community values. Going to the revenue requirements analysis, really this is just the financial plan, looking at what costs are being incurred and defining the necessary revenue. So historically, just looking at expenditures, they've been going up with inflation and imported cost of water. Revenues have more or less followed that, but because of the drought and conservation requests, we've seen revenues dip below expenditures. If we just simply forecast that forward, costs are going to keep going up with inflation, and our revenues, if we just keep them where they are going to fall because of water going from the potable system to the recycled system. So this study really aims to bridge the potential shortfalls that are identified through the rate changes. We also need to make sure we account for kind of externalities, so the interplay of demands and expenses, impacts to the cash flow, capital needs, price elasticity, and any kind of uncertainty in going into the future. The demand analysis, this is where we spend a lot of our time looking at how people have been using the system, just kind of giving a historical sense of things. Over the past 10 years, we've bounced around between 10 and 14,000 acre feet. That line's kind of declining historically as people conserve on the long run. The dotted line you see there is your 10-year average. Now, what's impressive here is demand last year fell 26% from the 10-year average. And it's 14% lower than the previous low that we've experienced in 2010. This is what we mean by we're in a new normal. What's going to be the bounce back and really adjusting the rates and the cost structure to reflect these new realities. The cost of service really defines how costs are incurred and how that's going to be translated to how the revenues should be recovered. The simplest way to look at this is how do you fill a glass of water? We look at the system, we've got water resources, storage, conveyance, distribution, billing, and admin. Now, all of these have to be translated into how they are recovered on the customer bill. So we've got revenue categories, customer, so is it a unit cost per bill, a meter size, something that reflects differently from a 1-inch meter to a 2-inch meter, and then usage. One question that comes up is, looking at the system and tiered rates, how can they be easily defined? And tiered rates really are designed to capture the increasing costs incurred to meet peak demands. And peak demands here are defined from a seasonal aspect. And while we don't have minute by minute meter readings, we do have the best level of detail that we have being your monthly meter reads. And taking a look at that in aggregate by customer class, and specifically for single family, we can see that there's normally a seasonal peak here. And makes sense, coincides with your irrigation needs. Low usage in the winter when basically you shut your sprinklers off, peak usage when we have some of those hot summer months we have. And the way the tiers are designed is if you used that incremental peak in summer, that all stacks. So if we have 10 people peaking in the summer, the system's got to be designed to provide that peak capacity throughout the year. If they just use a consistent level of water throughout the year, the system could be designed differently. And so it's these costs that we can allocate those incurred incremental capacity requirements to define tiered rates. When we get into the rate design, there's going to be a lot of balancing acts that we'll have to look at. Rate design, Prop 218 compliance, equity across customer classes, and affordability at low usage are common needs. And then we also have to balance financial stability. So when we look at looking to recover our fixed costs, one of the things is we can just increase the fixed cost to recover fixed expenditures. Problem is affordability at low usage. So really balancing the needs here in terms of the realities and what the community and the council desire. And just asking those same questions in terms of have the assumptions changed, how should they be updated, the customer impacts, and the financial risks. Rate alternatives, we're pretty much starting with a clean slate here. We have the existing rates as the foundation, but everything's currently on the table. So the currently available alternatives are uniform rates. This is what's currently enacted for commercial users, 1 unit of cost for all units of volume used. We've got seasonal rates, which reflect the different cost of the seasons. Increasing block rates, which right now there's a combination of the two for single family. Your allocations, your tiers get larger as your need increases during the summer. And then water budgets, which is just like tiered rates, but it's tailored to each specific parcel. These alternatives can be mixed and matched and balanced really to meet these key objectives: fairness, conservation, equity, affordability, financial stability, and administrative ease. So we'll be taking a look at these alternatives and what best fits the cost structure and the revenue needs. And then that brings us kind of full circle back to the public outreach and the messaging, just giving everyone here outlook in terms of what the next steps are. We'll take any input received here, work with staff to prepare some draft results now through about October, introduce those draft results to the council in October, and then look to initiate the Proposition 218 procedures in November for rate adoption in January 1 of 2017. So with that, we're happy to open up the floor to Q&A, and then of course if there are any questions or if anyone looks at this afterwards, additional questions can be sent to Tom, and the information's on the screen.
Thank you. Okay, we have two cards, and we will invite Brad Malamed
Yeah.
to.
Well, we said it was informal, and I'll just tell you, just because I'm about this. I listened to everything you said, and I was really interested in it. And what I was really interested in is something Tom said: we want fair and equitable rates. And then you added that it should be legal rates. I couldn't agree more. And I think one of the problems with your presentation is almost everything you said was about, and let me use the words you said at the end. I couldn't quite write them down as fast as you showed them, but affordable, fair, conservation, you were looking to those things. Those aren't 218 factors. Factors of 218 is clear, the cost to produce the water. What you're trying to do through your manipulation, and I think it's really, the citizens should know this, you want low prices, I think you said, for low usage. That's not one of the things we're supposed to do as a government. We're not supposed to pick winners and losers. We're supposed to follow the law. So I'm disturbed at the outset that you're going down a route that is clearly illegal. Having said that, I know you don't mean to violate any laws. I just want to say that I think to the greatest extent that your study shows that you've done all these things, I think you're proving to all of us you're violating the law. As far as seasonal rates, if you go to that, fine and dandy. But I have a problem with that. Our structure is already in place. The theory that we have higher rates in the summer would imply by definition that we don't have the structure in place, and we have to add cost to provide that water. But in fact, our 210 miles of pipes and our reservoirs do supply, in fact, less water, as you see now, than we've ever done in the past. We're our lowest rate ever. So to now say that in the summer we're using water that costs too much because there's this huge demand, well, how come it doesn't affect commercial at a flat rate? Somehow they can peak all they want in the summer and it doesn't cost them anything. You know, bottom line, and because I don't want to take up a lot of time, but because I sent you questions, so you know my concerns. But bottom line, this is all phony, okay? It's all fraud. It's all, it's Houdini stuff, okay? You're going to go and you're going to put, two glasses of water out here, and one's going to be full and one's going to be empty, depending what season it is. Nonsense of the first order. Listen, it's simple. We know that it costs us $20 million, give or take $3 million a year to supply the water. You divide it by the number of gallons, the acre feet we use, the gallons we use, and that's the rate. And you know what? It works, and it doesn't take an expert. This man could do it because I know he's smart, and this guy's really smart, so I know he can do it. And I know James and Eric can do it. So the question is, why aren't we doing it that way? Because we're not allowed to use these fairness and affordability factors. That's not Prop 218. And the final point I want to make in general is this. And I told you guys this earlier. You don't have smart meters in our town. So all this nonsense you're saying about, well, we figured out this, that, and the other thing. No, you haven't. You know, you and I could make all kinds of assumptions with numbers. Stats are easy to do. And if you want to go and sit down with me for an hour or two, and Tom, we'll give you 100 different factors. You can say residents do this, and commercial do this, and irrigation does this, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, but that doesn't really affect costs, okay? Because unlike what you said, I don't think you were trying to mislead us. We get all of our water except for 5% from the Orange County, and I think it's called the Municipal Water District. And we have a contract every year that we pay like $50 or $100 or $500,000 for, and then we get water at the exact same price for all the units we need. We don't exceed that limit. If I'm wrong, Tom, correct me, because I don't want to say anything that's incorrect. But we get our water at a flat rate. So when the other firm, and I'm not blaming you guys, I think we're I'm glad the city hired you. The other firm had rates of $5.05 for water we were paying $1.75 for, built into Tier 3, presumably because nobody's been able to verify this for me, because if we exceeded our thing, we might have to go to some other person that charges $5.05. Well, that's not legal. That was totally illegal. But I talked to James and said, I'm not suing you for that because they just made up a number. Well, you guys don't make up a number. We have a contract that will supply all the water needs we have. So Tier 3, even under your system, will get compressed way down towards Tier 1. And the other point I made was that all these charges, and you inferred this, all these charges you're talking about that get pushed to 2 and 3, like, for example, this conservation guy we have in town. Yet most conservation, believe it or not, and you guys know this, comes from Tier 1. And yet not one penny of that money was allocated to Tier 1 of his salary, about $175,000 with benefits and whatnot. Again, if I'm off a little bit, it's the point I'm trying to make. And what happens if Tier 3 disappeared? Then nobody would recover that money. You know, it's all nonsense. It's all fraud. It's all deceitful. And if you guys go that route, all we wind up with is a lawsuit. How about we do it the right way? How about we stop the nonsense, this book you have, and go to real, fair allocations based on what we have right now, which is not smart meters. You want to get smart meters and tell us what time of the day it's high and low? Okay. And the other point I want to make is when we allocate this fixed cost, because you didn't discuss this, there's a fixed cost charge. For what I can tell from the previous study, it was another Houdini thing. He just made up a number. We're going to charge $5 a month. There's no description, or whatever the number was. There's no description of what charges that covers, why they picked that number. And in fact, if you read the study, it says, we picked the number. We don't have a basis for it. We just picked it. Well, if you like that, then let's pick all the billing, because that's just, everybody has to get a bill. That's $3.50 a month. Let's make it fixed cost. I don't know how else we get there. I don't know how, if there's other fixed costs like Tom's salary, let's put it in our monthly charge, because to get 1 unit of water, I got to pay it. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that, but if we're going to pick a number, let's pick a number that makes sense. Let's justify it, because that will help rich people, poor people. Any system you design is going to hurt me. I'm a 1 unit user, okay? But it's not fair for me to get subsidized just because you want to make it affordable for somebody that uses 1 unit. Finally, in this last report, again, I hope you don't do some of these things, they actually gave a subsidy to Tier 1 water. I think it's like 35 cents a unit, a subsidy. That's illegal on its face because it's reducing the actual cost. I'm only suggesting if you want to subsidize people's water, we can do that out of the general fund. That's not illegal. But we can't do it out of the water rates. So let's try to keep things above board. Let's try to let us know what's going on. And hopefully we'll all be happy with results. Hopefully we can get uniform. And please explain to me, if we don't get uniform rates, how it can apply to commercial, but not to residential, and not the excuse they use, well, we can't find out what's fair for them. Fair isn't the answer to why one group is uniform and one isn't. Thank you so much.
Okay, Brad, thank you. Do you want to respond to some of the comments that Brad made?
Sure. If you don't mind, there were a lot of really good points in there, and so I wrote them all down, so I captured them, but I do think it's important, just in general, to just talk about how we're going to take these into consideration. Sure. Absolutely. Okay. So point 1, 218. There's a legal requirement in terms of proportionality. That is first and foremost. And so with respect to the other factors such as stability, protection, low income, that's a secondary benefit. And so first and foremost, we need to meet the proportionality requirement of 218. And then once, as you said...
I don't know the term proportionality. Could you tell me what that means? Because I don't read 218 that way.
Sure.
I read it says you can only charge the cost to provide the services.
Absolutely. And so, using an example that you used, Tom's salary, in terms of, you talked about fixed costs. That's another really important one. So how do we recover fixed costs from different customers? So Pierce talked about it. Every customer sending out a bill, there's a cost to doing so. So it's fair to reasonably say everyone's going to, regardless of your commercial customer, single family, multifamily, going to pay the same for that, sending out the cost of a bill. And so then the other example was Tom's salary. Okay, so Tom is basically supporting, so regardless if you're using 1 unit or 100 units, there's a benefit. And so we can go through a reasonable allocation to say, okay, how can we proportionally, reasonably recover those costs from each individual customer? And so what basically 218 is saying is you need a rhyme and a reason that, as Pierce said, there's a close nexus between what the cost is and why a customer's paying that. And so specifically, one of your other really important points on the fixed charge, we will go through a process to say these costs are recovered through our fixed component, and here's why. Now, we can make a decision legally so that says we can recover from the fixed, we can recover from the volumetric, but here's our logic. And so absolute commitment, we will do that. The other, you noted in terms of differences between customer classes. So first and foremost, Pierce kind of walked us through that process. That cost of service, why is each customer class paying what they're paying? And so you take the $20 million, really rounded, of course, and say, okay, of that $20 million, how much is a portion to single-family residential? How much is a portion to commercial, multifamily, and so forth? That's step number 1.
When you say portion, are you talking about cost or volume?
Costs.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, no, great question. And then from there, once we can show that I know I'm collecting $5 million from commercial, then at that point, We then look one step further, and then what's the appropriate recovery from within that class to make sure that we have that close nexus of that $5 million and what those commercial customers are paying. And so it's kind of a stepwise process. Step one, by class. Step two, by customer within that specific class. And so, I don't know why the answer wasn't, sufficient before. One of the things with commercial customers, why do we group single family together? We're looking for customers with relatively consistent usage patterns. The thing about commercial customers, a restaurant versus a hotel versus a laundromat, they use water differently. And we don't know how they're going to use water over the course of the year. And so if we go down the path of to continue with a tiered rate, it's easier to do it on a single family residential where we get consistency, a homogeneous group relative to a non-homogeneous group. And so that's one of the things we'll look at. We'll look at the individual usage patterns within those customer classes. So we will go down that path.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
You say usage patterns, but I just debunked the usage patterns because you don't have smart meters. So within these classes, you don't know that there's any consistency between the actual use. You're just hypothecating.
So that's a really good question. So one of the things that Pierce noted in the presentation, and we were talking about this a little bit beforehand, we do want to look at the demand patterns and have a good sense. What we have in terms of the granularity of information is on a monthly basis, not on an instantaneous basis. So smart meter, the benefit of smart meters, it tells us on an instantaneous basis. But nevertheless, looking at your actual usage, the city's actual usage pattern, is we have a higher demand across the city in the summer. We have longer days, hotter days, et cetera. People use more water. And so we can look at and truly see empirically that in the winter we use less, in the summer we use more.
But our tiers aren't seasonal.
Understood. And
and since you're building that into a tiered system, I just asked you how you could relate those two.
So then that was a really good point too. So one of the things that we're specifically looking at right now, as we're going in and looking at the customer data, is how the current rate structure. And no, I'm not opining on good, bad, or indifferent. But what we want to come out of the back end is what is the appropriate rate structure for the city and the community that then ties to that usage pattern and our specific cost. And so the last thing that I'll note, and thanks for letting me to speak so long on this issue, is we do want to look at the infrastructure because, as Pierce noted, you noted, we have infrastructure in place. We're not growing, and so we're not going out and expanding the system, but nevertheless, we still need to pay for it. And so what is the most appropriate way for individual customers to pay for it? Is it the fact that I have access to the system? One drop of water means I use the system, therefore I pay the same exact amount. Or is it okay to say, based on how much of the system, how much volume you're taking, how much your proportionate demand on the system? And so those are two of the things we'll be looking at across the study, and we'll be specifically coming back to this group and then the community at large to say, here's a rate structure, and here's the why, and here's how it specifically relates back to the infrastructure.
Do you mind if I ask one more question?
Sure, please.
All that makes sense. Everything you're telling me is logical, whatever. Whether it's legal or not, it's another issue. But what doesn't make any sense is if you go through all this analysis for non-commercial, because you say we need to do that for whatever reason. That same analysis could be done in commercial. You choose not to. You could analyze restaurants versus landscape, I don't know, whatever it is. But the point is that's why 218 is clear, and this is the thing I said in my letter. You put those 5 user groups, whatever they are, on the same street with the same pipes, using the same water, and at the end of the day with your study, if you go to uniform and non-uniform, you're going to have 5 different rates. Well, 218 says it has to be the same cost. And I'm going to tell you at the end of the day, if you go to one uniform and one tiered, you're going to get 5 different rates. That can't pass 218 muster. Because at the end of the day, it's the same water out of the same pipes at the same volume. And I just want to be clear, I'm not trying to create a lawsuit, but I think you have one on your hands if you go down that same old, tired route of doing this game. So I just want to be upfront about it.
Sure. No, do you want to comment?
One of the main challenges, or one of the main things we'll look at is how we. One of the things we'll do is look at how we define a customer class, and again, looking at administrative ease in terms of can we create 100 customer classes or 5 or 1.
Or one.
And those are the different types of things we'll look at. And as Rob mentioned, really looking at the customer data and grouping like users together to define similar consumption profiles. The consumption profiles then looked into how those costs are incurred, and if we can say that person that's peaking more, so irrigation users, peak more in the summer than anyone else relative to their average demand, then we can say it's reasonable that they're allocated a bigger proportion or that proportional share of that infrastructure component.
But
And-
why? The infrastructure's already built. It's in place. It would make sense if you're looking at forward cost of infrastructure. But it
Well-
doesn't make any sense with in-place infrastructure.
It does, because you have to maintain in-place
But
infrastructure.
only the maintenance cost. That's
Well-
not what's being done under the old study. I don't know what you're going to do.
All of the assets in the city are replaced on a routine basis. And so every pumping station, an approximately 15-year cycle, is replaced. Something that cost $150,000 in 2003 is $1 million today. So the cost of infrastructure is constant. And that's what we're talking about recapturing. We're not talking about necessarily building new reservoirs and new pump stations, but it's to replace and maintain
And why
those
would
that
it's
are
also
that are
buying
here
commercial
today.
unitary rate?
And I want to make one other comment about seasonal rates. We do, in fact, have seasonal rates in place for multifamily and single-family properties. You see that in the summer periods where the Tier 2 allocation is expanded, with the idea that during the summer, more water is allocated, by example, to a single-family property because of a higher demand for outdoor use.
No, to be fair, you have the same tiered rate, you just give me a bigger allocation of it.
That is correct.
That's where the allocations are illegal. But that's another debate for another
Yeah,
day.
but I just wanted to make the point that there is an increase of allocation.
That's right.
And by default, you're buying the water for less money, because if you didn't get an increased allocation, you'd be paying at Tier 3, by example. So,
Understood.
but your point is noted.
Understood, and that's right.
Okay. Do you have any other comments?
I think you guys
Right
did
now?
a great job. I mean, I
Great.
appreciate you answering the questions.
Thanks, Brad. Then we'll call Mr. Jeff Vermeer.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation also. It was interesting to see how this is all structured, and certainly I'm not as eloquent as Brad, and I have much less to talk about, but I have received my water bill, so it becomes very personal for me, and it's considerably more than it's ever been. And at first, my assumption was, well, there must be some kind of a problem, but in looking at it, I noticed that it's for 34 days instead of a standard 30. And I didn't have a problem with that until I started thinking about how this related to the tier structure, at which point I began to tear, because it was clear to me that 34 days pushed me well into the Tier 2 structure. By the way, my water usage was probably 40% more than the same period last year, although I'm watering less. So that struck me as a little bit odd, but maybe I shower more. At any rate, looking at the tier structure, I assume, and this is perhaps my bad, but I'm assuming that the tier rates are based on a 30-day allocation. And if that's true, then we really ought to normalize the tiers based on the number of days in the billing cycle. And this is not your deal, but it's what's already been here, but I would hope that we could put these in the notes to consider in the future, because clearly, if you consider a 28 to 35 day revolving around the average of 30, those 28 and 29 day periods, you're not going to get anything back, or at least not nearly as much as you're going to spend into the higher tier. So I would just suggest that we at least try and normalize the rates around that. If we have a 34-day cycle as we did this time, it should be 34 times a daily normalized rate, which would probably be, instead of a 9-unit or an 8-unit tier, maybe something like 7.8 divided by 34 and multiplied by 30. Okay? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
It's probably worth just addressing, and we talked a little bit about this. It is based on a monthly average, and so we do have billing cycles. And because CCF, 100, it's an archaic phrase, but 748 gallons, so 100 cubic feet. We round we round to the CCF. And so
What's a CCF?
it's a 748 gallon unit. It's a unit of water. It's basically what the water meters are based on. And so it rounds one direction or the other. But the duly noted, talking about the billing cycle and the averages, so thank you.
Can Tom explain why he was billed for 34 days rather than 30?
Yes, I can. There's a few factors that make billing difficult to accomplish on a monthly basis on the same day and the same number of days in a month. There's the obvious, there's 28 days in February normally and 30 days, in June, by example. So each month has a different number of days. We do read meters manually right now. And that is a limitation. If we had automated meter reading, you certainly could capture the read on the same date or day of every month. You'd still have a difference in billing cycle because of the length of the months. Today we're using 30 and a half days as the average cycle. And it does tend to make the meter read cycle a little bit. We do the read cycle in the same order every month so that when the meter readers start, they always start in the same place and they always end in the same place. That's an attempt to kind of normalize the cycle. We consider anything over 32 days to be extraordinary, and we look for it. I don't know that we caught Mr. Vermeers in advance, but it is our policy to adjust when it's brought to our attention. In the typical account in town, it generally doesn't impact the bill, because if you look at a customer using 9 units a month, by example, 2 extra days isn't enough to round up to another unit. And but when it crosses tiers, that's when we're all concerned about it. So if it crosses a customer from tier 1 into 2 or 2 into 3, we have a process in place to adjust that. There's probably no way around that without going to automated meters.
Why can't, you use very sophisticated software to bill. Why can't the billing software take care of it? It could do exactly what, I'm sorry, I don't know the gentleman's name, asked, and he said if it's longer, allocate it on the right days and keep them into the right, if he had 9 units in tier 1 and he went an extra 10%,
right,
he should get 9.9 units. And the software is easy to take care of that.
I did write that software.
It's so
Yeah.
simple. I write software like that. So, that's so trivial that it's amazing to me that it hasn't already been implemented.
The type of software you're talking about is typically referred to as budget-based billing system. And it's actually quite sophisticated, and I don't doubt that there are many people that can produce it. What it would do is it would take a multitude of factors into account to develop your allocation for a month, and your allocation meaning by customer class today, because that's how we operate. So it would look at a single-family residence and say, okay, here's the variables: amount of precipitation, perhaps, number of days in a billing cycle, possibly the number of occupants. What other factors are used in a budget-based?
No,
Those are some of the.
I'm not suggesting. You're suggesting
But I'm
suggesting with what we have right now, what he's asking is very simple. You're going a whole other route of it. We're going to now allocate based on all these factors. No, that's already been taken care of.
the current software today that the city utilizes is not capable of using the number of days in a billing cycle to change the allocation. It's just not capable of it.
And this company that you use doesn't have software that is?
That's correct.
Okay.
We have looked at software that does this. It's considerably, it's expensive, in roughly the $500,000 range to make this conversion. So I think, Pierce talked about this earlier, which is an equitability, and at some point the sophistication of the billing system, has to be countered by affordability. And if the problem is significant enough that you need to spend $500,000 to solve it, that's understandable. But that might not be equitable to many of the users in the system who aren't experiencing the problem.
I understand. And there's another issue that we can outsource the whole billing issue they take over the software then, and it's significantly cheaper than what we're doing now.
I'm not sure. I haven't had that quoted. Perhaps you
Well,
have.
I did.
Okay.
I actually costed it out when I saw the last study, and if we would use third-party billing companies, there's a ton of them in this country, I'm sure you're familiar with them. They're far less, because their software spans all their clients, so they're not licensing software, and they are full-functioning software, they do anything you need. So, I mean, again, I think part of the study should be, how do we save money? How do we save money for all of our clients, for all of our people?
That's a fair question, but there's also the aspect of contracting out a service that we're currently providing. And based on recent cases in Costa Mesa having to do with contracting out services, what the attorneys have told me is we can't contract out something that isn't a specialized service.
It is,
So
but this is a specialized service.
But we've been providing the service for how many years, so therefore it's not a specialized service. But I appreciate your comment.
We've talked about this a lot, and we and I disagree on this subject. Your lawyers are giving you bad advice.
Okay, well.
Okay? Anytime you want, I'm happy to write a paper on it
There's
for
a
you.
ton of libertarian leaning cities in this county that would love to contract out everything, and they're not doing it for a reason. And they all have different
But
attorneys.
James, you know, if you talk to your lawyers, that there's steps that you can take to contract out each of these services as long as you go through the steps. It's difficult, but it's not impossible, and it is legal. But if you don't want to do it, that's fine, I understand. But it's not that we can't, it's that we choose not to. Okay, fair enough.
Okay, very good.
Real quick, Jeff, I want to address your high water use concerns. If you're using water similar to what you were a year ago and you're actually 40% higher, that's concerning that you may have a leak or your irrigation controller may not be programmed properly. If you contact the utilities department, our conservation staff would be willing to work with you to help you reduce your water use.
Thank you, because I really am environmentally conscious, and I don't want to waste water, for sure. Plus, I don't want to, I can afford $122 a month, if that's what it really costs for water usage. I just don't want to be watering my neighbor's sewer.
Dave, we have his contact information. Why don't we schedule
Okay.
a meeting with Mr. Vermeer?
We'll get our staff in contact with you then.
Okay, I'll be gone the next 2 weeks, so here in September.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Would like to ask Krista Busa, is that pronounced properly? Please.
So I have a question regarding affordability as well. So it's have you considered to combine, for example, those seasonal rates or like multiple step rates together with like percentage of people revenues, for example, so that people pay some kind of fixed rate, and then during the summer they pay 0.5. There's like random numbers, but 0.5% of the revenue, or during the winter 0.25 and so on, in order to make that that for everybody this water is affordable. So the people who are earning with a higher revenue like pay more, and the people with less revenue pay less. Have you thought about that?
I mean, start with one of the critical things in California that we are subject to is this idea with this constitutional requirement. This is Proposition 218, and so one of the comments that came earlier was that we have to charge everyone their exact cost to provide the service, and that exact cost or proportional cost is what we'll be after as part of the study. What we can't do is ask one ratepayer to pay more on behalf of another in order to create a subsidy. What we can do is we can look at what other agencies have looked at is low-income affordability. So you talked about, and I like your comment, would you be willing to put a little bit more in the, pay a little bit more every month, check a box, I'll contribute $2 per month additional in order to help my neighbors that can't afford as much. If I were willing to do that, that's outside of the rate calculation, and that's basically a charity giving, which is outside of the rate structure. But very specifically in California, we have to start with, what does it cost to serve this customer, what does it cost to serve that customer?
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes. Thanks.
But I appreciate the thought. It's definitely a struggle that we deal with across the industry, as water and wastewater services are expensive for a lot of folks.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Okay, those are all of the written questions we've had, and I think we've had a nice exchange, kind of open forum. Are there any other questions or comments tonight?
Can I follow up on a question, if you don't mind? I don't understand this penchant of experts like yourselves to want to use tiered structures at all. I don't understand, you have list all these factors, like say you just asked, affordability.
Right.
And then you admit we can't do that.
Right.
And conservation, you can't do that either under 218. So why do we go down this route of expensive rate calculations when really, bottom line, you've admitted, everybody, that commercial gets uniform rates. And the studies show that uniform rates actually reduce water consumption over tiered rates. Tiered rates actually cause more water use.
Right.
And the studies are out there, just in case anybody, if you disagree, let me know. But the studies show that uniform rates conserve more water than tiered rates. And there's a bunch of them out there. And I've cited them to Tom, and I've cited them to the city. So why do we want to go through this machination of gyrations when uniform rates actually are fairer? Like, there's not a store in the world that says, the more you use, the more you pay. In fact, they'll give you discounts. And also, the final thing I want to say to you is the pendulum I don't get. We're at a water supply now to get $20 million. If water use, everything else being equal, goes down, we've got to raise rates.
Right.
Because our fixed costs increase over that water.
Right.
Okay? Economic theory.
Right.
Yet, the same economic theory says if water use increases, our price goes down. And yet, you're going to find the most amazing thing in the world, that as water rates increases, tier 3, where you're using more water, the rates are higher. That's impossible. It defies explanation. And I want you to discuss how you guys can break all economic theory through your machinations. I think it's that's where I'm bothered.
Was that one question or three?
That's one. The two subparts.
I saw
Okay.
Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield, so I know that question.
So if I may, just on that final comment that you made, in terms of pricing, the more you use, economic theory, this is a point-in-time calculation. One of the hardest things we will have is what are we going to sell this year and next? And we're trying to set rates for the next 5 years. And so one of the big challenges here is trying to put a number on it and say, are we going to sell 10,000 acre feet or 12,000 acre feet? And while the economic theory holds true, what we want to definitely make sure is if we assume 11,000 acre feet and we sell 10,000 acre feet, what's that revenue risk?
That's the same tiered or untiered. We agree with that.
Right.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Deciding how much we're going to use. But it doesn't affect which tiers we're doing.
So, can I?
Yeah,
So there's an adage, right? 3 points in a poem. So I'll try to make 3 points, and I won't do a poem. But so in terms of structures, do we have a predetermined? Is there something that I like walking in every time and say that we're going to do this? The answer is no. And so Pierce showed a slide in the different rate structures. There is a policy, and consistency is a good thing, all things being equal. And so, but we're going to have a very honest look. In terms of, the second point that you made is, economic theory in terms of what influences water consumption. And, from all of my studying, what I can see is education and enforcement are the two primary. Price is the tertiary effect. In fact, you just said it a minute ago. I want to be efficient. I'm environmentally conscious, et cetera. Especially with everything on the news. There were a lot of agencies that didn't change anything other than the news saying conserve, we're in a drought. And that has a huge influence. And so exactly to that point. Now, the most important thing that we're tasked with doing as part of the study is tying, what the cost is to what we're asking people to pay. And so the idea of a tiered rate, if we are going to talk about that specific rate structure, is that it does cost us more from an infrastructure standpoint, and then some communities it costs us more from a supply standpoint in order to provide that water. And so what we're going to look at is try to understand costs of the city and how they tie back to an appropriate rate structure to proportionally recover cost. We're actually pretty well along in terms of doing the forecasting, the financing component of it, And we're actually just now about to start looking at the cost of service component. So we'll come back and answer that question.
But that can't be true in our city where our usage down to lowest ever. We have the infrastructure for another,
Right.
you have the price of this volume. But
right.
if volume goes up,
The one,
and people are being charged in tier 3, that water costs less
so the one,
until we get up 25% from where we are today.
Well, and that's why we're doing the study. And so we'll ask you to be patient with us, and because we haven't gotten to the conclusion, and we ask you to bear with us as we go through the process.
Are we going to look at more than just a 3-tier system? Are we going to look at a 5-tier, a 2-tier?
I think we're going to look at a 1-tier system. We're going to look at a 3-tier system, which exists today. You know, will we look at a 5-tier system? Yeah, I don't
Why don't we
know.
look at a 2-tier system?
I think, Brad, we're going to look at everything between 1 and 5.
Okay, that's fair.
It's
enough.
safe to say?
yeah.
Can I add to that question?
Yes, sir.
As a part of that examination, will you be looking at the preventive maintenance or the replacement maintenance of the equipment
Yes.
based on usage? Because if usage reduces by 20%, that would imply that your pumps would perhaps lay up, maybe not 20%, but 15% to 12 to 15% longer. Maybe it reduces the replacement cost, or at least it spreads that period out.
Dave, you want to?
Yeah, that will definitely be looked at. Part of the challenges with the infrastructure sizing is most of the infrastructure is sized on fire flow and potential for fire flow demands. But definitely electricity will reduce, your operation and maintenance on equipment and longevity will increase. So those are positives.
The peak load requirements you can't insert.
Right.
So, just one more question, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Can we get a copy, if we send a note to you, can we get a copy, an electronic copy? Put it on the web tomorrow.
Yeah, we're going to post this this public hearing, and the PowerPoint will be available tomorrow on our website.
Contact, we'll send it to them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that would be nice.
I'll email it to you.
I'll take a copy too. Because
Okay.
We don't have his contact information.
every day.
Yeah. What's your last name, sir?
I don't know. You guys, gentlemen, we all want to thank you, at least the residents that are here. I mean, this was very informative and very helpful.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Want to thank you all for attending, and this will close the public workshop.
Thank you.
Good night.